Welcome back to Theya. I'm here with Rearden at Rearden Code on X. He's a freedom fighter, stoic thinker, and maker, and he's a Bitcoin engineer and leader. Rearden, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, man. This is the first show that we've had on with a Bitcoin expert, and I say expert because you are one. We've had markets people on, we've had math PhDs on, but we've never had somebody who is actually working in and building on Bitcoin and knows it inside and out. And so we're going to talk ossification today. We're going to talk covenants, script restoration, all the good stuff. So I suppose we'll kick things off with a little bit about yourself, as much as you'd like to disclose. Like, what are you currently working on? What's your background? Where are you working now?
Yeah, I mean, right now, well, background-wise, I've been working on Bitcoin self-custody stuff for 6 years now, starting at Casa back in 2018. Um, so yeah, that's what I do, I guess, in my day job is work on Bitcoin self-custody projects. So I worked at Casa, Bitco, now at Swan. Got the Swan hat, got to rep the thing. So we have a Swan Vault product that I work on. In terms of my background before that, I've been an anarchist my whole life, and so Bitcoin was a natural fit for me as a software engineer and anarchist. And so I'm in the right place, doing the right things, trying to make the world better.
Phenomenal. Love it. Absolutely love it. Bitcoin is the place to be for that. Yeah. So a lot of stuff going on now in Bitcoin, right? We're not talking price action today. Obviously, it's a whole separate story. And if you want that, you can visit my account. But for today, we're talking Bitcoin, the network with a capital B. So let's jump right into ossification. First and foremost, what is Bitcoin ossification and what are the arguments for and against it? There's been so much discourse on the feed, a lot of misinformation, a lot of people who are misinformed like myself. I'm hoping you could clear the air here.
It's kind of an interesting topic. Um, at a high level, the question is whether Bitcoin, the protocol, needs continuous upgrades to keep serving its role as better money for the world. And so there's been some talk from people, for example, Michael Saylor is probably the best example of this. And he's been saying, stop changing the protocol, don't touch it. And then on the other side of that, there's people like myself and Andrew Polstra and all the OG Bitcoiners who think we need to keep working on Bitcoin to help it succeed, and that it's not done. Um, and so that's kind of what the debate is. And I think that I've been thinking really hard about this. I'm not going to be debating Vijay Boyapati next week sometime about it. And so I've been thinking really hard about this question of ossification. And one of the things that I've come up with as a way to think about it is how would we know when Bitcoin was done? When Satoshi launched Bitcoin in 2009, there were several critical bugs in it that absolutely would be dead by now if we hadn't fixed. And so we've solved bugs over the years. We've released major upgrades to Bitcoin. We've released small upgrades to Bitcoin. And I don't think that we really have any way of knowing whether it's done right now or whether it was done in 2014 or 2016. We just don't know. And so the best that we can do as people who care about Bitcoin is every day try to make Bitcoin the best it can be to serve the financial needs of people. And if we keep doing that continuously, I think Bitcoin, honestly, I wouldn't work in it if I didn't think it had a great chance of success. But if we stop, it's impossible to know if we stopped at the right point. Because I know if we'd stopped in 2009, it'd be dead. And I think if we stopped now, it would probably also die at some point. But I have no way of knowing for sure. So the best we can do is to keep working on it.
Hmm. That's a good way of putting it because no one can fully understand what Bitcoin is and what it is going to be. And it would really help if we had the creator still around to pick his brain on it, but we don't. This thing is it was discovered, it was plopped in our lap, and now we're here to kind of make sense of it all. And so, in your view, would it kind of be, uh, it, it would be far too early for us to know if Bitcoin has kind of stepped into the role that it's going to fulfill for humanity for the next several thousand years, tens of thousand years, if we stop today, if it could perform that function, because we don't even know if we've discovered it yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I've said that before. I said I had a funny interaction on X one
Mm-hmm.
time. I said nobody understands Bitcoin, and then someone responded to me like, "Well, maybe you don't." And I'm like, "Dude, I've been in Bitcoin since way longer than you have. You are in this phase of you think you know everything, but the reality is that all of us, no matter how long anyone's been in Bitcoin, even Marty Malmy, who's been in since the very beginning, none of us know everything about Bitcoin. We're all learning. There's more rabbit holes to dive down. Uh, Full time Bitcoin 6 years, and I still find new rabbit holes to dive deep into for weeks at a time. Like just the way it is. There's so much to learn.
Oh yeah, so much to learn, and I'm already doing some learning on this conversation. Um, let me ask you this. This is something that I was thinking about. Maybe it's a silly question, but can Bitcoin ossification protect the network while also hindering its growth? Because it seems like that's kind of what you're suggesting. Because again, we don't know what Bitcoin's going to evolve into, um, what it needs in order to get where it's going, and so ossification would protect Bitcoin, the network as it is. But do you believe that it would hinder its growth as a result of that?
I do, yeah, and I think to be fair, I think that the resistance to change is healthy for Bitcoin as well, right? We shouldn't kind of accept blindly some developer proposed idea for Bitcoin, and no one is saying that we should. Um, uh, Michael Saylor had this comment about how we shouldn't have a government of the devs who push whatever code they want. And literally no one is proposing that, of course. Bitcoin will always be a consensus network. And so all devs can do is write some code and then suggest, hey, this is what we think might be the best thing. But it only becomes Bitcoin if the network of nodes, of economic nodes, runs it. There's no way for developers to force a change on the network. And so the resistance to change is healthy. That's the reason Bitcoin Core, the client, doesn't have an automatic update mechanism, and it never will. We don't want users to blindly accept changes from developers. So both all sides of this are valuable to the network. Um, so yes, it's protective, and then it can also hinder the growth. I think kind of poorly reasoned narratives resisting all changes by default, throwing mud or FUD at changes rather than thoughtfully considering changes and rebutting them if they're bad. Like one of the things, for example, that I think is actively harmful to Bitcoin's future is when people reject a change because of who they see supporting it. There's, Udi Wertheimer is an extremely annoying person, and people say, oh, he likes cat, so I don't like cat. And that's a very poor way to make a decision. Because if that were the case, then Udi Wertheimer could single-handedly destroy Bitcoin by supporting the thing that would protect Bitcoin. And so all I really want is for people to think about changes from a thoughtful, maybe first principles. We do that a lot in Bitcoin. We try to go to first principles about money. Go to first principles, think things through, use your brain to figure things out. Don't use talking heads to determine your own thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of the skepticism that's inherent with Bitcoin is it's good, but it's positioned in the wrong way. People are skeptical of individuals, and so every idea that they say is terrible. Every idea that they say sucks, it's bad, I'm going to ignore it. They might be coming from the wrong people, or this skepticism, which is good. I mean, it's why most people get into Bitcoin. They're jaded toward higher authority, and they want something else. It's why you got into Bitcoin, right? It's why I got into Bitcoin. I got into Bitcoin for probably a different reason. But we have this overarching skepticism, and then in Bitcoin, that skepticism is kind of hardened. But it's important that we recognize that, and we recognize that maybe I shouldn't be telling every single person that I don't like to go screw themselves. Maybe there's something worthwhile that they're saying. I'm going to think about their ideas instead of the person.
Yeah, and there's so much that goes into that. Bitcoiners are kind of notoriously bad at communicating ideas, and so that's one of the reasons I kind of became a more public face in Bitcoin is that I wanted to try to present ideas in a way that people can reason about them. Help people start to reason about things, not throw them out there. Actually, Christian Decker made a great point in Bitcoin Plus Plus in Austin where he said, let's not be salespeople. Let's teach. Let's be teachers, not salespeople. And I think that's a really important thing for everybody in Bitcoin, no matter where you're coming from, whether you're in the financial side or whether you're in the technical side, to be teachers, not salespeople. So I think that's a good message.
That is a really good message. And it's something that, because I often get asked, and you probably get asked, you're probably the Bitcoin guy in like your local groups. I know I'm the Bitcoin guy in my local groups. And a lot of people will ask me, well, how do you sell Bitcoin? How do you tell people to buy Bitcoin? I don't tell people to buy Bitcoin. I don't. I never have. Maybe initially, but it's best that we
Exactly.
teach. From my perspective, we explain, from my perspective, we explain the problem, right? From my perspective, coming from like a financial markets background, from a financial markets education, I'm best at explaining the problem and then presenting all the different solutions. rather than being like, the world is ending, you need to buy Bitcoin right now and shut up, right? It's much better if, and from your perspective, teaching people about the network, how it works, so that they're better equipped to deal with these debates when and where they come up, instead of trying to sell them on something.
Yeah, exactly right. And I definitely went through a phase, as I started to say, of selling people on Bitcoin. Everyone should buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then more recently, people ask me, should I buy Bitcoin? And I'm like, if you have to ask me, then you shouldn't yet. You should learn more, and then you will. But I'm not going to try to tell you should buy Bitcoin.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. If someone asks you, should I buy? Then it's because they're euphoric and they see price action and they want to hop in, not because they're interested in Bitcoin as an asset. They just see number go up. It's a good reason for people to get in, but they need to understand Bitcoin in order to get in. And so, in the vein of understanding Bitcoin, I guess one more question on ossification here. Would you consider the network as like being close to being ossified? Do you think that with the amount of nodes that are currently in existence, with where the protocol is at today, are we at risk of not being able to push forward any substantial changes? Or do you think that there's, we're not at a really high risk of the protocol staying the way it is forever?
I go back and forth on that, to be totally honest. I personally think that we are not that close, is kind of my current stance, although again, I go back and forth on it. It one of the things that I noticed when I started kind of not very hard, but pushing for changes to Bitcoin, um, was that people are afraid of contentious forks. And I get that. The block size war was a painful time for a lot of people. People, literally poured their hearts and souls into fighting the block size increase at the time. And people got very burned in that process of the contentious fork and all of the market pain that happened where people were racing to make replay protection wallets. Like all this stuff happened. And so people have a lot of call it institutional scar tissue from that time in the block size war. Uh, I strongly suspect that there will be more contentious soft forks, and I also think that's okay. Um, it sucks. It could be painful. The fact is that the only way we know what Bitcoin is by what fork has the greatest work. And so when there comes a push to a shove, people are going to try to improve Bitcoin, and some of those things are going to get kicked to the curb, and others are going to go forward as Bitcoin with the greatest work. And all of us who run nodes will have coins on both if we want, and that's okay. So I think that's my message here, is that, well, contentious forks can be painful. I think they will happen, is my personal opinion, and I think it's okay that they happen. It's part of the process of Bitcoin maturing and continuing to improve and fulfill its potential.
Fantastic. And so, in that vein, let's switch gears over to covenants. One of the big changes that has happened recently, huge, massively in debate. We could talk about ordinals too, I suppose. But what are covenants first and foremost, and how do they work in the context of Bitcoin?
Man, it's such a nuanced question. The first thing I want to say is that everything in Bitcoin is already a covenant.
Mm-hmm.
We have a signature covenant. That's the primary way we lock our Bitcoins. The coins can't move unless the signature is provided. That's a covenant requiring a signature. We have lock time covenants in the form of check lock time verify and check sequence verify. So we already have covenants. What's being talked about primarily right now, well, I shouldn't say primarily. One of the main covenant types being talked about is an output restriction covenant. Where can this Bitcoin go the next time it's spent? Right. So we already have covenants that say you must have this signature or you must spend it after this time. Now we're talking about where you must spend it the next time some unit of Bitcoin is spent, a UTXO. So that's what covenants are, is just restrictions on how Bitcoin is spent. And what's being talked about now is additional restrictions beyond signatures or lock time verifications. So this lets people take more control of their coins. If you want to say, these coins are locked to this signature until 5 years after they're locked, and then anybody can send them to these other keys. You could do that. And that might be something you want to do if you have maybe a very trusted Bitcoin expert in your family. You might want to lock your funds so that they're on your keys for the first 5 years. But if you lose your keys in a boating accident, after 5 years, they just get sent automatically to your trusted friend. So that's all covenants are in a nutshell, is the ways we restrict the spending of Bitcoin, and it gives us additional flexibility in how we restrict that beyond just signatures and times.
Okay, excellent. And for everyone's information, I personally lost my Bitcoin in a boating accident. Unfortunately, it was terrible. It was awful. My keys are not in that safe that you see behind me, behind the block clock there. Anyway, so the covenants that are being hotly debated right now, I guess, what's your take on all of them?
I think the general my opinion shifted in Austin for Bitcoin Plus Plus. Rusty Russell came in swinging, and he had some really good points. So prior to Bitcoin Plus Plus in Austin, I was very much in favor of starting with some limited form of covenants. I had a proposal out there called L Enhanced, which included op check template verify, op check sig from stack, and op internal key. I thought that was a nice limited package that provides a lot of useful locking behavior for users of Bitcoin without doing too much. And Rusty kind of came in with this idea that, you know, that's all great and that's a fine proposal. But what we should really be doing with Bitcoin is giving users as much freedom as we possibly can in how they lock their coins, as long as it's safe for the network. And so he came in with the script restoration project, or the Great Script Restoration, and said, this is the better way to go. And so my take right now is that, and I was posting about this on X just before this interview, is that opcat on its own, which is one of the hotly debated covenant proposals out there, would not be a good way to go, because opcat gives users a ton of freedom, but it's like freedom where every way you want to use that freedom, there's sharp knives around you, so you're trying to like use Bitcoin and getting cut all over the place. Whereas the script restoration project gives users the same and a little bit more freedom, but with different tools available. So you've got your knives, but you've also got your hammers, and you've got your wrenches and everything you need to use Bitcoin effectively, to lock your Bitcoin the way you want to in a safe way. So I still like the L Enhanced proposal that I put out there. I think it's a great limited set of things to do. And so if we were to say, as a Bitcoin broader community, we really want to keep Bitcoin's functionality somewhat limited, Bitcoin's locking behavior somewhat limited, then L Enhanced is a great way to go. I think there's much more of a push right now. There's a lot of momentum behind opcat and the ability to lock your funds kind of however you want. And if we want to do something where you can lock your funds anyway, we should make it nice to use, like the script restoration project.
Wonderful. And so before we get to the script restoration project, what exactly is opcat? I've heard that the proposal could bring like smart contract functionality to Bitcoin, which again, like the whole idea of smart contracts is something that I gag at. Personally, right? But what on earth is opcat, and why is it less preferable to what you're proposing with L Enhance?
So opcat, at a conceptual level, like what it actually does in Bitcoin's scripting language is incredibly simple. So Bitcoin scripting language, there's a stack of data, and then there's opcodes that operate on it. And so opcat takes two things from the stack, it puts them together, and it puts them back on the stack. That's it. There's nothing else to opcat than that. Because of some quirks of Bitcoin being a verification language and some quirks of cryptography is just math, as Andrew Polster likes to say, opcat can be used to inspect the contents of the transaction that is spending some Bitcoin. And if you can inspect the contents of the transaction, you can also require certain things of that transaction. And so that's where opcat gets you covenants, is that through these quirks, you can inspect the contents of the transaction, and then you can restrict. So that's fine. opcat can do those things. Does that enable smart contracts on Bitcoin? Man, such a weird question and topic. Smart contracts, as they exist on Ethereum, have some very specific properties that people often associate with the words smart contracts. One of those is that contract A can call contract B. Another is that contracts can store global state between executions of the contract. No change to Bitcoin's scripting language will ever enable those two behaviors. You can never call another script. That's just fundamentally not how Bitcoin works. And there's no global state in Bitcoin. You cannot access any global state. So, do we get smart contracts? I would say no, but others would say yes, because it does make the language more, you can lock your Bitcoin in more different ways. And some of those might look like smart contracts. But of course, I would say if that's a smart contract, then we already have smart contracts on Bitcoin. You can do these things called discrete log contracts or scriptless scripts. And that's effectively a smart contract by most useful definitions of the thing. So I don't know.
All right. So yeah, then let's dive into script restoration here. We have your views on Bitcoin ossification. We know where you stand with covenants and what covenants are. So what is the Great Script Restoration Project, and what are its goals?
So I think the goal, I'll start there, of script restoration is to make locking Bitcoin using Bitcoin script better, to make it easier, better, more effective, more secure, just better in kind of a broad sense. There are problems with Bitcoin script as it is today. One of the most common that people talk about is there's no way to create what's called reactive security, where if someone gets access to one of your keys, they will try to take your Bitcoin on chain, and you will have some window of time to recover your Bitcoin. We use something kind of like reactive security with Lightning Network, but it only works because it's a two-party thing where both parties sign each transaction. We don't have reactive security for a single holder or even for a multisig quorum in the general sense. And so that's something that would be great for Bitcoin users to have, whether they're big custodians or medium-sized individual holders. I would love to be able to lock my Bitcoin in a state where if I lose my key and someone gets access to it, I can have either an automatic watchtower or myself kind of checking the chain for transactions that try to spend my Bitcoin, and I can sweep it off to a safer key that I stored somewhere else.
Are there
So
services
that
right now
kind of
that
thing is
do
just an
something like
example.
that, or are there services right now? Sorry for interrupting, but are there services right now that exist that do something like that?
There's a way to do it using pre-signed transactions. There have been various iterations of it. The first one I saw was written by Brian Bishop, Kenjer. Um, and so there are ways to make something like this, but they use pre-signed transactions, which means you have to store a bunch of pre-signed transactions in order to make it work. And you have to make sure, which is technically impossible in cryptography, you have to make sure that the original key that signed those transactions was deleted in order for that to be secure. And so they exist, but they're limited.
Gotcha. Okay. Continue. Sorry for interrupting.
Um, yeah, so the goal is just to make Bitcoin script better and like simple. There's so many little annoyances about Bitcoin script. Here's an example that I think people will be able to kind of get their heads around. In Bitcoin script today, all numbers in script are 31 bits of value plus a sign. 31 bits, just to give people the size of that, represents about 21 Bitcoin. So you can represent 21 Bitcoin in script, but you can't represent more than 21 Bitcoin in script with the way numbers are today. And so you can't confidently write a script in Bitcoin that does anything to do math on the amount of Bitcoin being moved by some transaction. And so one of the things that script restoration would do is just give us numbers that let us represent any amount of Bitcoin and do math on it. So that's kind of a simple example of the ways in which Bitcoin script right now is hard to use, and the script restoration project would make it easier to use and easier to lock Bitcoin in the ways you want. If you want to have Bitcoin that's locked so that it can only be spent up to 1 million sats at a time, you could do that with restored script. You can't do that today.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with script restoration, how does script restoration improve Bitcoin's, I mean, enabling new use cases, but I suppose also improve Bitcoin scalability. So how does script restoration do both of those things, improve its scalability and also enable new use cases?
So the scalability question is such a nuanced one. You're asking all the tricky questions here, which is great.
It's good. Now
Um,
you'll have a bunch of clips to use.
yeah, yeah. Uh, in terms of the scalability, there are many proposals out there for scaling Bitcoin. Um, we've seen the cat VM proposal, we've seen ARC, we've seen timeout trees, um, channel factories. There's a bunch of different ideas out there. Payment pools. There's just tons. The list goes on and on and on of different ways. And the nice thing about script restoration is that it enables all of those and many more. We don't know, and I don't think we can know right now, kind of going back to the earlier points in this conversation, we just can't know what the future of Bitcoin scalability is going to look like, whether the cost of liquidity is going to dominate or whether the cost of on-chain fees is going to dominate, whether there's going to be common use of insurance as part of a scaling proposal where someone might be inside of a pool of coins and they need insurance to be able to protect their coins in case the coordinator tries to steal, or whether it's going to require on-chain resolution. I can't predict the shape of the market for Bitcoin scalability. We have Lightning right now. Lightning works well. we need something else. I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but script restoration gives us the flexibility to experiment with many different ways to scale Bitcoin along those various lines that I mentioned. So that's how it helps scalability. It gives us the space to build these kinds of multi-party protocols that will let Bitcoin scale. Lightning is a two-party channel protocol with routing between the channels. In order for Bitcoin to scale to many more users, we need to have many more parties sharing UTXOs than just the two in Lightning. In terms of new use cases, it's not something that I care deeply about. I want Bitcoin to be money. That's what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. But I think Bitcoin as money, I guess, like a use case for Bitcoin as money would be better saving. Like that's a better use case right now. It's hard right now for someone to get started saving in Bitcoin, because if you want to get started, you start with a exchange, a custodian, they hold on to your Bitcoin, and until you have enough to put it into your own UTXO, you're just kind of stuck with this custodian relationship. And so I think the scalability actually is the use case, where users who want to buy a little bit of Bitcoin and have some control over it in their own keys can do that if we have something like the script restoration project out there.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. And so how long have you been working on the Great Script Restoration Project? Just out of curiosity.
I first heard about it at the end of April in Austin. So it's really Rusty's project. He's the one who started it. People give me credit because I'm loud on X about it. Really, I'm really just reflecting what Rusty said and promoting his work, because I think it's a great direction for Bitcoin. So since Austin, I've been basically writing down things we talked about in Austin and helping communicate about them.
Wonderful. And so kind of to back up before we close out here, I think we'll go for another 15 minutes. This has been extremely dense, and I know the viewers have found a great deal of value in it. We've got your views on ossification, right? You believe that we need to lean away from ossification for the time being because we don't know what Bitcoin's going to evolve into. And so if we make this totally irreparable decision, not irreparable rather, but irreversible, I suppose, we could be sealing the door shut on what Bitcoin is going to be. In terms of covenants, right? You explained what covenants are. You explained that some are more useful than others, and you've made it clear which ones you believe, right? Opcat not necessarily as good compared to Enhance, and you've talked about the script restoration project, and its utility in Bitcoin scalability, right? Improving Bitcoin scalability and what Bitcoin can be. How do your opinions compare to other experts in the field? Would you say that you are the odd man out, the ugly duckling, or would you say that there are more people that agree with you than disagree with you?
In terms of experts, a lot of people have been swayed by the script restoration ideas. I frankly see a surprising number of experts that are pretty pro Opcat on its own. I was actually discussing it with Adam Back on Twitter today, or X, whatever it's called today. And so there's quite a few experts out there that are pro Opcat, Adam Back and Andrew Polstra being examples of that. And then there's quite a few folks who are quite in favor of script restoration. And then there's much less kind of broad-based expert support for really anything else, which has surprised me. So as much as I love L-Enhance, that kind of limited covenant approach, it's not super popular among the experts. It's kind of more popular among the in-betweeners, the people who are technical but not experts, seem to like the L-Enhance or CTV, that kind of type of limited covenant stuff. But the experts seem to be much more in the we should build something that's more flexible in terms of how people can lock their coins, way up at the cat or script restoration.
Gotcha. Okay. And I suppose to close out here, I have a couple questions about the future of Bitcoin. How do you think that everything we've discussed, we'll talk, I guess, ossification and script restoration specifically. How will these two pieces of discourse shape the future of Bitcoin? And what kind of outcomes do you see as being most favorable for the future of Bitcoin?
So my opinion, as of right now, today as we record, is that the script restoration project, as it gets built out, Rusty's spending, I think, every other week working on it. I'm going to do what I can to help in terms of helping with the TX hash portion of it. And as we build that out, I think the comments will start to roll in from the rest of the experts in the space on the details of it. And so my expectation is that over the next year to 18 months, we'll build that out and get a lot of comments. And this is total like hand wavy guessing, but I think that once that's all written down and the details are public and reviewable, the mass of Bitcoin experts will actually come on board with that project. And then it'll be a matter of bringing on the kind of in between semi-technical folks, technical but not experts. And I expect that once everyone's on the same page and it's all written down exactly what's included and what's possible, then those people will start to kind of understand it, digest it, and come on board as well. So there's kind of this process of build, review, educate that's going to be happening around that. And my expectation also is that many of the people who are kind of in the Ossify camp, they are in the Ossify camp because they see so much different messaging from experts. Like I said, there's experts that want CTV, there's experts that want CAT, there's experts that want script restoration. And when they see those different messages, people are like, well, then we shouldn't do anything because there's not agreement on what's next. When Taproot was proposed, there was broad agreement. Basically, all the experts said, yes, we should do Taproot. And I think that will happen again. And there'll actually be even more experts who kind of get on board with something like script restoration. And when in the fullness of time, there's that kind of expert consensus, and then there's concrete review, kind of the mid-tier of semi-expert or technical users review it, and they also come on board, the ossification message will actually, I think, kind of dwindle away in the face of broad agreement from experts and technical users.
Phenomenal. Okay. And so two questions left. What do you believe are the key challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for Bitcoin? Two very open-ended questions. I'll let you kind of ball out here.
I think one of the biggest challenges is for people who are in Bitcoin to retain their mental flexibility. It's something that I get sometimes yelled at because I focus so hard on retaining my mental flexibility that sometimes I might jump between ideas too quickly. But I think it's better to be flexible and move between ideas quickly and even go back sometimes to a previous idea rather than becoming ourselves ossified as Bitcoiners. We've had to accept things about the money being broken, about the world being broken in some ways because of the money being broken, and retaining that flexibility, continuing to be flexible and not kind of entrenching ourselves in some fixed idea of exactly how Bitcoin should work, exactly what it should look like, etc., is going to serve us all well. So that's both the challenge and the opportunity. Bitcoiners staying flexible mentally as we digest things about Bitcoin and about the world. What do they say? If you're not learning, you're dead. Something like that. There's a quote out there about that, and I think it's very, very true. So all of us can keep learning and stay flexible in what we learn and how we look at ideas.
100%, 100%. It's off screen, but for the people wondering, in the room I'm in now in my office, there's a sticky note right over there. It's out of view, but it says lifelong learner, because that's what we have to do. You can never wake up and think that you know everything. Every single one of us in Bitcoin has this, this learning curve we go on where we think we're the only ones who have discovered this. We've cracked the code. We understand Bitcoin, but none of us do. And so it's important that not just in Bitcoin, but in other areas of life too, that we stay lifelong learners, because we're doing a detriment to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren if we are saying, yep, Bitcoin is what it is. I know exactly what it is. I want to keep it the exact same way. It's fine if you hold that opinion, but you need to be arriving at that conclusion as someone who is intellectually flexible and you're not set in your ways. It is good to have skepticism, but don't make that your entire character, I think. And the last question I have...
I think you have to keep arriving at your conclusions over and over again, right? I have a conclusion today, but that's not my conclusion forever. It's the one I have today. Like, that's the key thing. Like, yeah, I absolutely have conclusions today. And I said it a few times in this interview. Like, there's things I think today, and they may change tomorrow, next week, next month, as new information comes in. And I think there's quite a few Bitcoiners that seem to have this idea that Bitcoin has fixed money. It's a fixed point and it's done forever, but it can't be. The world's not fixed. Ideas are not fixed. There will always be new information.
100%, and we have to adapt to it. And so the last question I have for you, how can the Bitcoin community balance stability, which is kind of the what we want to maintain, even as we build on top of it and do new things, and innovation in the future. How can the Bitcoin community best balance stability with innovation as we move forward?
I think one of the great things about Bitcoin is that stability is a very firm default, right? Even going back to the very early days, Satoshi, there's that great quote, Bitcoin is such that once the initial software is released, all of the major aspects of the protocol are fixed forever. And that's a very important thing about Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a strong default of stability. We discovered with SegWit that we can do quite a lot to expand Bitcoin within that default of stability. And we should absolutely, as Bitcoiners, be extremely skeptical of anything that changes Bitcoin as much as SegWit did, even if it has that backwards compatibility stability as the baseline. That said, we can, I think, also innovate in much narrower spaces of Bitcoin. We can look at the history of changes in Bitcoin. SegWit gave us a new extension block for the witness data, so it expanded the block size from 1 to up to 4 megabytes. That was a big change to how Bitcoin works. It was, fortunately, achieved massive consensus as part of the block size war. And so with that massive consensus, we could be confident it was a good change, even though it kind of disrupted the stability, essentially. Taproot was a much smaller change. It was a new segregated witness version, added no new extension blocks, no additional block size of any sort, but it was still a fairly big change. And now we're in this place where even the most destabilizing change, let's say, that's being considered right now is much, much, much more stable than something like Taproot. Opcat, or the script restoration project, these are smaller changes than Taproot. They don't introduce a new signature algorithm. They don't introduce a new tree structure to scripts. They're much smaller than Taproot, and then much, much, much smaller than SegWit was. So there is, I think, an important balance to be struck there, and we should absolutely kind of tune our skepticism based on the degree of change we're making. If someone starts saying they're adding a new extension block to Bitcoin, like every red flag should go off. Like that's a huge, huge thing that should be setting off every alert bell. And if someone says they want to add like a new Merkle tree checking structure, that should be also like the orange alert going off. And then when people are saying, hey, I want to add an opcode that lets me build this new second layer that I think is going to help a lot of Bitcoiners hold their coins more safely, we should still be cautious about it. We should still like have some flags and review everything. But I don't think we need to have that like red alert situation as if someone's adding a new extension block.
Wonderful. Excellent. So, balanced skepticism where it's warranted, and having a gradient of skepticism, red light, green light, green light, yellow light, orange light, I suppose, red light, instead of being red light on every change.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, well, wonderful. So, Rearden, it has been absolutely excellent having you on. Before we go, I want to point all of our users to check out the Theya app. This is, of course, who we're doing the video for. Funded in Silicon Valley, one of the first Bitcoin-only companies that's ever been able to do that. The world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution. You could check it out. Multi-sig vaults in literally 5 minutes. Single-sig vaults in even less time. You can have a hardware key, 2 hardware keys, hardware key, and a mobile key stored in your iPhone secure enclave, encrypted and backed up to iCloud. So if you lose your iPhone, you can restore it. It really is a wonderful, wonderful solution. So I encourage everyone to go check out the Theya app, download it in the App Store today, fiddle with it, play with it, see if you like it. I know that you will. It's the world's simplest Bitcoin self-custody solution. And with that, Rearden, this has been awesome, man. I've learned a great deal. I'm going to go back and listen to this. The viewers are probably going to go back and listen to it too. I'll probably listen to it twice because I want to learn. So I'm going to have probably going to have you back on the show. I'd love to have you back on the show as these things keep evolving, as you keep doing great work with the script restoration project, the great script restoration project, rather. And last things last, I suppose, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm Rearden Code on Twitter, Rearden Code on a lot of platforms. Be careful of impersonators on Telegram, and I look forward to talking to everyone on the timeline.
Absolutely fantastic. Thanks again for coming on, man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks. Yeah.